There is no shame in being a victim. In today's episode of the Bravery Academy, I'm joined by Mary Turner Thomson, a published author of The Bigamist and The Psychopath. In these books, she tells her story of being married to a serial conman, Will Jordan. And really what she shares is how you can recover, how you can thrive and build resilience after going through trauma. We will be covering some sensitive topics today, particularly around psychopaths. So if this is not an episode that you're wanting to be listening to, feel free to move on.
We've got so much to talk about. We do. We really do. Oh, Mary, welcome to the Bravery Academy. I can already see that this is going to be a very fun and fantastic podcast episode, which is kind of unusual when we're both talking about maybe the men that we've dated, or in your case, married, who absolutely conned us. So before we start, can you tell me a bit about where you live and where you're from?
Sure, I am from and I live in Edinburgh in Scotland. So born and bred and grew up here and just love Edinburgh so much. I have no desire to go anywhere else, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah,
it's my happy place, yes.
Happy place. So the reason why you're here today is around this amazing story that you've been sharing for several years now. Can you tell me about Will Jordan?
Yeah. Where do
we start? How old were you when you met him?
Oh, gosh, how old was I when I met him? I was 34. Yes, 34. And I just had my first child by a relationship that had quite spectacularly failed. The classic reason why you should never get involved with a musician. It's like he desperately wanted to have a child, but actually didn't have any clue about what that involved or any kind of realistic idea of what parenting meant. So I was left on my own with a 9-month-old child. And after about, 2 or 3 months or whatever, my friends and family were saying, there's this new thing called internet dating. Why don't you try it? What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
And that was the year 2000. So 23 years ago, gosh. And I thought, I'll try it. I'll just dip a toe in and see what's out there.
I very much had the same experience, post-divorce. Someone saying, come on, give it a go, get out there. You'd be great on that. It's a bit different.
Yeah.
We were swiping probably by that stage because it was only about 7 years ago, I think, since it was swipe status.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different, but they're not different, right? Because it's still the nervousness of going out there and dating.
Yeah. And so you're putting out your profile and saying, hey, I'm available. I mean, from my generation, because I'm 58 now. And in my generation, it was very brash to say, it's like putting yourself on a shop shelf, going, here, come buy me.
Yeah.
And it felt very, very strange. But I mean, it makes a lot of sense as well. I mean, I do think it's funny when you have the people going into parties and stuff like that when I was young. And you were guessing whether people were married or not. You're flirting. You find somebody you want to flirt with. And then you find out, oh no, they've been happily married for 10 years. It's like, oh, all that work, all that effort put in, it's a complete waste of time. So I kind of like the idea of the Tinder type.
Did you meet some other people before you met Will Jordan?
Yeah, I actually met 3 people beforehand. One I got on with so well. He was like a brother. And, we were friends for a long time. Actually, I lost touch now. One who I met, I went on a date with, and he started complaining about, I asked him if he was married, if he had a relationship, and he hated his ex-wife. And then I said, do you have any children? He said, yeah, I've got one daughter, but she looks like her mother, unfortunately.
Oh!
And I just kind of went, that's a bit of a red flag. It's like, just went, no, thank you very much. So I kind of went running away from that date like it was a mad axe murderer. And I did date one other guy. And then I found out he was seeing my friends behind my back, not as girlfriends or anything, but, people would see him and say, oh, you're Mary, come to a party. And then he wouldn't tell me about it. He would just go to the party on his own. And I just thought, that's just not right.
An amber flag, that one.
So I gave up on the whole idea of internet dating. I didn't know that when you cancelled your account in those days, they just kept you up because they wanted the numbers. So I didn't even know that I was still on this dating site. And I got this message from this guy who just seemed so natural and so charismatic and just came across as the most genuine person on the planet. Very chatty, very breezy, very open because, he even said he couldn't have kids because he had a bad bout of mumps as a child. He actually sent that to me in the very first email.
That was the first setup right there.
Yes.
Right
before
there.
before I even had replied to him. So he'd said he was American. He'd been chasing his career around the globe because he couldn't have kids. He'd never really settled down and have a family, but now his biological clock was ticking, and even though he couldn't have kids of his own, he was really interested in now settling down.
I had a similar story. I had a very similar story with, I've been so busy with my businesses, and later on it was because I was also in the Australian Special Forces as well. So, all these reasons.
Oh, so similar, yes.
So similar with the layers of it. And, I'm a unicorn because I haven't been married and I haven't had kids. Actually, that's a red flag, you'll find. It's actually what we call a red flag.
That is, yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, so many similarities, isn't there, between us? It's quite interesting.
How did he kind of start to wingle his way into your life at that point then?
I mean, it was like just daily conversations. I mean, about 30 messages back and forth every day. And then we agreed to meet after, I think it was about 2 weeks of just chatting online. And everything I'd read, he'd read. We'd talk about books and concepts and philosophy and films we'd watched, and sort of like we had so much in common. And then when we met, the first thing that happened actually was he said, "I'd really like to talk to you in person. I'd like to come and have a telephone call." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Sort of like, so this is getting real now. Sent him my phone number, and he said, "I'll call you in half an hour," and nothing happened. And the evening went by and nothing happened. And I thought, okay, right, well, what is this? Is he just gathering phone numbers or something? But he seemed so genuine and so wanted to talk to me. He'd asked me for it. And so it just didn't make any logical sense to me. Why would he ask for my phone number and then not call? And, sort of like went to bed, got up the next day, still nothing from him. And I always got good morning from him and everything else. I thought he'd fallen down the stairs and broken his neck or something. I thought something had happened to him because it didn't make any logical sense as to why anyone would behave like this. And this went on for like 3 days. And I just thought, okay, right, the guy's a player. He's just been messing me around. And then after 3 days, I just got this message going, "Oh, I'm really sorry I didn't get in touch. I was called away to work." And I was just like, good enough. Not at all good enough. Get lost. Thank you. That's not at all. That's not nearly a good enough reason. You got called away to work. And he was like, begging and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I've been getting on so well. And I really do want to talk to you and explain, please, it's okay for me to call." And I didn't have to give him, I'd already given him my number. He could have just phoned. But, he wanted me to be prepared for his call. I mean, looking back now, I know exactly what was going on. But at the time, it was just like, this guy clearly isn't interested. So why is he now saying all these things? And it kept me so off balance. It kept me so confused. And then when he did call, it was just like, the conversation just flowed so naturally. And I was just taking a mickey because I was like, this is clearly going nowhere. And I don't know if you know that expression, taking a mickey.
We do have that. Yeah,
yes, yeah, you do that.
New Zealand has that one. Take the mickey.
I do say something sometimes all around the world. I say things and I realise it's a Scottish expression that I didn't realise before.
Yes.
But yeah, I just was taking the mickey basically and just being funny. And but as a result, I wasn't nervous anymore. And it just really kind of clicked and hit it off. We were talking every day. And then after, say, about sort of 2.5 weeks after we first started talking online, we met in person. And it just kind of, just went from one step to another very, very quickly. And 2.5 weeks after we met, he proposed.
Yeah, how soon it was.
Oh, yes. I mean, it was crazy. And I literally said no. I just said absolutely not. I mean, even the proposal was weird.
How did he propose?
Oh, again, it's another one where he was supposed to be taking me to London to go to a party with all his work colleagues. And so I was all packed and I had my daughter. My mum was looking after my daughter and I hadn't introduced them yet. And I think it was sort of 2 days before Christmas or something like that. And he didn't turn up. And he's constantly saying, "I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I've been delayed. And don't worry, we'll get the next flight," and all the rest of it. I sat there. Eventually, I just opened a bottle of wine and drank the entire thing and went to bed. And I was like, I'm not putting up with that behavior, And then at 7:00 in the morning, he turned up on my doorstep with a teddy bear with a diamond ring around its neck and asked me to marry him when I was in the midst of dumping him. I mean, I was in the midst of saying, "No, I'm not having this. Thank you very much. You can get lost." And he said, "Well, I was really upset as well because I was going to do this," and handed me the teddy bear. So the things he said and did, and then the things he said and did in person just totally didn't fit. And there's a kind of cognitive dissonance, isn't there, when you have someone like that that you kind of, your logical brain is going, no, that's utter nonsense. But then there's something they do and suddenly you go, oh, okay, so they are interested. It really messes with your brain chemistry and you end up so off balance. I think I've used a lovely line in the book, The Psychopath. You start to feel like you're on this pedestal and you don't realize at the time they're actually gluing you to it. Like, so as a result, after when they start knocking the pedestal out from under you, you can't move. You don't know where you're going or what direction to turn to. It is a systematic and deliberate process to manipulate people. And it's like, it doesn't matter how smart you are and everything else. The only way it doesn't work is if you don't have any empathy.
Exactly. So how did that relationship unfold? How did you go from then having that ring put in front of you to then eventually marrying him and then having kids?
Well, shorten the story because this could go on forever. Yeah, basically after about 3 or 4 months into the relationship, 2 things happened. One was he finally told me what he really did for a living, which was that he worked for the Official Department of Central Intelligence of the USA, more commonly known as the CIA. And that he'd been recruited directly out of university. He was not a spy. He was one of the IT guys. He was a guy, if you ever watch a spy movie, there's usually the guy in the van doing the IT stuff. He was the guy in the van. So it wasn't, hey, baby, I'm a spy. It's, hey, baby, yeah, I do have a weird job and I am an IT person, but I just happen to work for a rather strange organization. So it wasn't.
There's so many similarities. Again, it was the hey, baby, I'm a spy, but actually, I am a spy. Was it like?
What's so bizarre is the truth is actually more weird than the story he told. It's more dramatic. The other thing that happened is I rather miraculously found out I was pregnant, considering that he was, completely convinced he was infertile. Yeah, it turned out, his parents rang me to say how pleased they were to have their first grandchild, etc., etc. And we got married a few months after our first daughter was born. And so life got a bit better after he told me what he did for a living, because then suddenly other people would be able to contact me and say, he's been called away, and rather than being left waiting. There were times actually, like there's times I was in a theatre and he was supposed to join me in the theatre. He was supposed to join me going to the theatre, didn't turn up. And then once he said he was on his way and to leave the ticket on the door. And I left the ticket on the door. Suddenly somebody came up to me when I was sitting in the seat and just said, I've got a message for you. He can't come, just so you know. And I was just like, oh, okay, sort of fine.
Did he pay people?
Would ring. It's so much simpler than that. It's so much simpler. It's like, this is the way our minds work, all right? Because he set the scenario as, if I can't come, there'll be people that contact you. Sort of like, they won't be able to tell you they are, but there'll be people that contact you, etc. So people would phone me and say, he can't come because he's been called away or anything else, right? This particular person that came in the theatre, for instance, and said, just let you know that he can't come, right? It was probably one of the reception staff or the manager. He probably just phoned up and said, there's my wife. Could you just tell her I'm unable to come? It's really simple. Well, but to me, because he prepped me with this story of somebody will, and there's somebody will be connected. Different people would phone me and say, he's just been called away. I get lots of messages and various things with other things as well. But they could have been random people on the street that he just said, listen, I want to go and buy my wife a birthday present or something, and I'm going to be late, but she doesn't like it when I'm late. Would you possibly just give her a call on this number and just say, your husband's been called away? It's actually so much simpler. It's just because the psychology has been put in place with the victim that this is then evidence of what they're saying is true. So it's like that there are all sorts of things. He had this watch, which again in 2001 was quite spectacular technology. But this watch was just pure black, sort of with the hands and stuff like that. But he would get up out of bed because it's this thing that kind of given him almost like an electric shock. And I would go, what's going on? They're calling me away. And I would go, oh, all right. And then he would be so sleepy, he would fall back asleep in bed. All right. And then it would do it again. And I would, sort of like go, how did they not know you're moving? And he said, oh, it's, because it's got GPS in it, etc. It was just an alarm. Sorry, Mary. It didn't cross my mind at the time because at the time I was so sucked into the story. Yeah. Again, it was that cognitive dissonance. It just didn't fit with this guy who, came across as the loveliest, most loving, and so annoyed when he was called away and so irritated by it. It wasn't like he was itching to leave or anything. It's just like, So, yeah, it was just bizarre. But all these sort of little things, they reframe what they mean. He used to carry a gun, which in Scotland is just, no, that doesn't, especially since Dunblane, we don't do that. The Americans always have that thing about, what do you mean he's not allowed to carry a gun? But no, absolutely not in Scotland. And I never saw the gun. I felt it through his jacket. So he had a holster. I saw the holster. And he so it could have been a water pistol for all I know. But he used to lock this thing up in a cupboard when he came home.
Water pistol in the cupboard.
I don't know. It is like, I very possibly, I asked to see it. I mean, I didn't like the idea of him having a gun around my daughter, but he was very, very adamant. He gets it locked up when he comes home. So at least there was that. But yeah, I mean, just this, it's this odd, strange life I was living. And then he had told me he had a very bad experience when he was in a kind of war-torn area. I'll not go into that because it's all political at the moment. But he went into this war-torn area and he couldn't get out. And basically 3 months he disappeared for. And he was talking to me on a satellite phone, telling me about the dead kids in the street and all that kind of stuff. And so I was sitting at home kind of going, I'm being selfish by saying, not here to help with our daughter. But when he came back, his feet were all mangled. And sort of just a really horrendous state because he said he hadn't been able to take his socks and shoes off for 3 months because he'd been in this war town running from one place to another. Just all this kind of stuff happening. So he wanted to get out of the CIA and he did. And he became an IT programmer for a couple of rather large, rather famous organizations. And then people had found out his true name and true address at this thing. These same sort of people that would fly planes into the Twin Towers. And they were then blackmailing us, saying that because he now knew where he lived and where his children were, by this time he'd had a son as well, so had 2 children with him. They said basically if we didn't come up with money, they were going to kidnap the kids and rip bits of them and send them through the post. And this was 4 years into the relationship. And I was utterly brainwashed by this time. And I just sold everything I could get my hands on, including my flat, my life insurance, my piano, my car, anything I could get my hands on just to raise money to keep my kids safe. And it was like a shark's feeding frenzy. And I came up with about £198,000. And
wow.
I was left with nothing. Absolutely nothing. Even the money I was earning myself, I was putting towards helping him go from one place to another, trying to sort it out. The only person I thought I could trust at the time was him. And I was literally every night getting up and pacing the house with a taser in my hand that he'd given me. And expecting to see shadowy figures around the corner, and have to try and defend my kids against, I thought it was always going to be 3 guys. I don't know why. I mean, I was expecting to see them, not just worried about it, but actually I never slept. I didn't,
You must have been so exhausted.
It was a mess. I was a mess. And then fast forward to 5th of April 2006 and got a phone call from my husband's other wife. Fifth of April 2006, got a phone call from my husband's other wife. Turns out none of it was true. When he said he was in the war-torn area, he was with her, spent 2 weeks wearing boots 2 sizes too small for him, so he'd mangle his feet. That she had 5 children to him, her nanny had 2 children to him. The parents, who had rang me to say they were so pleased about having their first grandchild, had actually spent Christmas with the wife and the 5 children, the nanny and her 2 children, the Christmas before.
Oh, stop for a second on that one.
I love that. He's like, that's the reaction I get every time. Yeah.
So
his parents were complicit.
Right. Because this is what I can't understand with my common element of it, his mother stayed with me as well, with him, and knew his background, knew his past, been in jail in New Zealand and everything. Never mentioned anything.
Yep.
Why were they complicit? What's your take on Will Jordan's parents?
Yeah, for Will Jordan's parents, I'd say, I think probably his father was a psychopath and his mother was an apath. So what often happens with the parents or the family of a psychopath is that they have had it their entire lives. The parents, have been manipulated and abused by their child. So actually, when the psychopathic child gets a partner, it's actually a relief for the parents because they're no longer targeted themselves. So it's like, maybe this one can sort him out. Maybe this one will actually be good for him. But I mean, deep down, what it really is he's distracted for a while, so he's not doing it to me. And that's the apaths are basically people who do have conscience and remorse, who are not sociopathic or psychopathic or narcissistic. but they will dull their own empathy for the psychopath's other victims, because then it means that it's not them. So you find a lot of the henchmen around psychopaths are apaths, because as long as they're doing what the narcissist or psychopath is saying, then they won't be a target. I suspect with Will Jordan's parents, I think they probably were benefiting somewhat financially from the things he was doing. So he was probably helping support them with the money that he was taking from the women.
So many elements to your story. You have gone through it and captured it, both in both books, The Bigamist and The Psychopath. There's so many tales that then when you look at it from a helicopter view, you go, this just isn't normal. But when you're in it and all you see is one lens of it and one version, it's so hard to understand the why.
Yeah.
How did you, after that day, then move forward?
Well, one of the things that I think surprises most people is that when I got the phone call from the other wife, by that stage, the whole story. I mean, we haven't you know yourself because you've read the books.
But yeah, you need to read the book. Anybody listening, read the books and watch the documentary.
we're not even touching on some of the really dark parts of what he did, but sort of glossing over the headlines here. But basically, finding out it was just him was a massive relief. It was actually like getting a get out of jail free card. Yes, I had lost everything. I'd lost all my money. I wasn't rich. £188,000 is a lot of money, but that was my property. That was my car. That was, do you know what I mean?
Yes,
most people, they sell everything they own. You do know.
I do know.
But most people, they sell everything they own. Actually, they raise quite a lot of money. He'd also left me, by the way, £56,000 in debt because he took out credit cards in my name. Being my husband, he was allowed to do that. And then he had spouse cards, which he could then use with his name. And I knew nothing about these. But when the dust all settled, I started getting phone calls from the debt collectors saying, you owe us all this money. And I'm like, what for? So that was fun. But yeah, it's finding out that there was no shadowy people. Suddenly, I didn't have to worry about people kidnapping my kids and hurting them. Massive, massive relief.
You found out who the threat was, which was him, right? So that was the danger.
Yeah. It was it was like coming out of the Matrix. It was like a total reality shift. Another way of describing it is like people could say, why didn't you get a private detective on one or something? And it's like, to do that, you had to say, okay, well, I don't trust him. And I kept saying, well, if I don't trust him, then what's the point in the relationship anyway? So it's like trying to take the Grand Canyon in 2 jumps. It is the either or. It's not halfway. You can't dabble in this. It was one or the other. And it took that phone call from the other wife. It took something really quite dramatic to really snap me out of it and make me go, right, okay. So I did have suspicions, but every time I had a suspicion, I would just bury it.
The red flags that were coming up, could you research them or do anything like that, or you just weren't able to because it wasn't the information there?
No, I mean, the things like when he was in the war-torn place, he was actually sending me photographs. I was watching it all going on in the news as well.
Jeez.
So the stuff that he was telling me, I would then find out hours, days later on the news. I still don't know how he did that. There was one time Yasser Arafat was reported as dead, for instance, and he was sitting beside me in the office. And it came up on the BBC. I used to have the headlines come up on my computer when breaking news happened. I'm a bit of a news junkie. And it came up saying Yasser Arafat was dead. And it was huge news at the time. And I just said, oh my gosh, Yasser Arafat is dead. And he didn't look up from his computer. He just said, no, he's not. It's not dead. And I said, no. They've just come up on the BBC, have just announced it. No, not dead. And I was just like, all right, okay. And I thought it's sort of like, I'll leave him alone. I'll talk to him later. And it's about 2 or 3 hours later, the BBC then said, no, actually, he's not dead. He's been taken to hospital by ambulance. It was misreported. And he died about a week later. But I mean, genuinely that happened. And I don't know how he would know these things. And there was times when during conflicts and people were being kidnapped and executed on video, he was actually assessing those videos to see whether they were true before they were on the news. And I saw them before they were on the news. So it was all these kind of things that kind of proved that he was who said him. He was doing the job he said he was. Because I was seeing some of this stuff. And I genuinely don't know how he got hold of this stuff. I have no idea how he had access to this stuff before it was actually available on the news. Don't know. There were things about escapes. There were people that escaped and then been caught and taken back and all sorts of things. I mean, just really, really odd things that just kind of went, oh my gosh, yes, the only reason you could possibly know that is because you do the job you say. But as a lot of people have said, so how did he do that? And it's the only way I can say it's like, you don't have to know how a magic trick is done to know it's not real magic. You just have to kind of go, nah. So there was so much stuff. I mean, daily, so much stuff that kind of verified who he said he was. But yeah, it was all just mind games and tricks and stuff like that.
How did you feel at the time?
At the time when I found out, relief that, okay, I'd lost everything, but at least now I was free to start again. This is a little bit of a tangent here, and I'm perfectly okay talking about it. I can even crack jokes about it if you like. But I was molested as a child, sexual molestation as a child. From the age of 6 to the age of 26, I tortured myself because the abuse stopped when I was 6 years old. It was a family friend, and when my family found out, it was all stopped. And at 26, I kind of went, hang on a minute. And I kind of like, I did a lot of work to get there. But at 26, I just kind of went, I have tortured myself for 20 years. Because I couldn't accept that as a child, I didn't understand what was wrong. So I participated in the game. I was groomed and then I joined in. And because I joined in, I must be as bad as him. And so when this happened and when I found out about Will Jordan, I had already promised myself that I would never, ever, ever do that to myself again. That nobody should ever be ashamed or embarrassed of having been a victim of a crime, whether you're a child or an adult. There's a lovely campaign going on, It's Not My Shame, where people are wearing it on their t-shirts. And I thoroughly agree with that. So when this all happened, it was almost immediate. I have been a victim again, but I am not going to remain a victim. And I'm not going to be shy or embarrassed about what's happened. I've had people sort of say, oh, you must be really stupid to have believed him. I know I'm not stupid.
I've had the same thing.
I know I'm an intelligent woman. I'm not particularly gullible. I was naive about what psychopaths were, but I can forgive myself for that. I have nothing to be shy or embarrassed about, right? And I do find it extraordinary. When I first wrote the book, somebody said to me, ooh, are you going to write it under your own name? I was just like, yeah. It's like, why wouldn't I? But I think it's one of the things that's been the best thing about this whole experience is that over the last, oh my gosh, what is it now? So it was 2007 when the book first came out. That's 15 years? 16 years?
Yep.
16 years, yeah. God, I can't count, you can tell, can you? But the most powerful message that comes back to me all the time is that the people are still embarrassed and ashamed and a partner or has an affair, let alone all the rest of it. But somebody has an affair and they then actually feel so humiliated by it. And then they read my books and then they come back going, I realize I don't have anything to be embarrassed about. Thank you. And I think it takes women like us standing up and saying, this is my story and this is what happened to me. And I don't have anything to be ashamed about. I don't have anything to be crushed or humiliated about because I did nothing wrong. All I did was love with an open heart and not realize and understand how psychopaths work. I thought there was more chance of winning the lottery than there was of meeting a psychopath. Genuinely, I knew they existed. I just didn't know that they were 1% of society. 1 in 100 people.
I didn't think I knew they existed as much as like that number. That number gets me. Tell me about psychopaths.
That's a whole nother book.
It's another great book.
So 1% of society are psychopaths, 4% of CEOs, 25% of the prison population, because not all psychopaths are good at what they do. They say that 1 in 4 psychopaths are female. That's demonstrated in the UK by the fact that we have 4 criminal psychiatric facilities that house people who are criminally diagnosed as psychopaths. Only 1 of those is female. So you have 3 male and 1 female. The truth is, I reckon there are just as many female psychopaths as male, but women are much better at passing it off as either hormones or stress or all sorts of other things, because women are actually taught how to demonstrate empathy far more than men are. So as a result, I think women are far better at hiding psychopathy. To the point that I think quite a few psychopathic females don't even know they are. Not that they would care, but So about 10% of the finance industry are psychopaths. So that's a bit of improvement in the last few years. But there's 2 points in your brain that are sort of towards the back and above your ears that if I took my finger and I snapped it in half and just went crack right in front of you, your eyes would wince. They can see you doing it on the air. You kind of go, ooh, you wince and you feel, because it feels like 2 hot needles going into your skull. And that is a chemical empathic response, right? So psychopaths, sociopaths, and some narcissists do not have that response. So what happens is they can watch somebody get hurt and feel nothing. And it's a very popular game called Sims that people play. Do you know that? Okay, so it's a game where you have characters on your screen and you can make them get pregnant and have relationships, and you can move these people around and you can make them do things and you can make them say things to each other. And it's like being God. You can puppet master everybody. And to a psychopath, that's what the world is like. We're just electronic characters to be moved around. They don't feel any more empathy towards us than an ant farm. We are just players in their game to be moved around and see how long we can make them wait, see how much money we can get out of them, or what we can get them to do sexually. And the money, sex, and power that guides psychopaths, it's only money, sex, and power because those are the 3 measurements of control. They don't really care about the money or the sex or the power. It's just a measurement. It's so out with any empathic person's remit and so alien to us. Because, we see a child fall over and scrape all the skin off their knees. And we're like, oh, gosh, I want to help that kid. That's so sad. They see that happen. They go, oh, they're making a mess. So it's it's completely alien to anyone with empathy that someone can actually live their entire life without.
Why are we the targets they choose?
Yeah, so there is a scale of psychopathy. So 1% of society are full-blown out-and-out psychopaths. So that's 100%. It's 40 out of 40, actually, because that's on the PCLR, which is the Psychopath Checklist Revised, done by Dr. Robert Hare, who's the leading expert on psychopaths in the world. And that's the sort of benchmark that we use to assess whether somebody's a psychopath. So my ex would score 40 out of 40. Those types of people are 1% of society. However, up to 15% of society are on that spectrum. You think about that, that's less than 1 in 10.
A lot of my family. I've got a big family.
Those are people that range from just being selfish to being serial killers, And then you've got up to 15% of society are actually on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is high empathy. And this is something that's sort of quite new to me, but I did a test on empathy and came out extremely high. I mean, to the point that I can't watch those videos that my children watch where somebody's skateboarding down and lands awkwardly. I feel physical pain when I see these things. And that's because I have such high empathy. And the more I looked into this, the more I realized that actually the more empathic you are, the more likely you are to be a target of a psychopath. And it's very simple. They will test the waters, and they will test the waters by saying, my mother's ill, or something like that. And when they say my mother's ill, the person who turns around and goes, oh my gosh, that's awful. What can I do to help? That's somebody with high empathy. Somebody who's in that middle range would actually turn around and go, well, what do you expect me to do about it? All right. They don't have the empathy. They're not controlled by empathy. So they just kind of go, I don't understand what you're telling me. So those people don't become a target because they're not so easy to manipulate. Whereas we high empaths are really easy to manipulate because people just give us some sob story and we go, oh no, I want to help. How can I mother you? How can I be of assistance? Because we want to help people, because that's what matters to us, is those connections with other people. But actually, what our release and our cure for this is awareness and understanding. Because now, anyone hearing this, when some new boyfriend or whatever says, oh, my mother's ill, they'll stop and think, hang on a minute, and go, okay, so what is it you're asking me for? Instead of what can I do to help? So we don't volunteer it. It doesn't mean you don't help at all, but just hold back and be aware of those boundaries, because that's what makes us target. So when he first said he was going to phone me, waiting that 3 days, and I was worried about his health, basically, that was a test to see whether or not I would and how I'd respond to it, and also whether he could suck me in again afterwards. He did that with every single person, arranged to talk to them and then not. So it is actually a pattern of behavior.
Can you tell me about how many that you know of wives he's had and children?
Wives, he was married in the USA at least once, and then he was married in the UK, and then he married me whilst he was still married in the UK. So I know of 3 wives, 2 of which overlapped. But in 2006, when I found out about the other wife, I also found out about 5 fiancés. So I know that he had 2 wives and 5 fiancés all at the same time. I suspect that I would have just been another fiancé, except for the fact that my mother was ill. And I think he was keen on the inheritance. I think that's why he took the risk marrying me at the same time as being married to someone else. But yeah, I've no idea why he actually went through with the marriage. I found out actually that I thought when you got married that you had checks done to see that the person wasn't married to someone else. Turns out that in Scotland, they'll check in Scotland. In England, they'll check in England. In Wales, they'll check in Wales, et cetera, et cetera. So he could be married once in every single country and nobody would know. So, he could have had otherwise. I know of 21 victims who have come forward since I went public with the book. Nobody went public before me, but I've had people who were before me come forward since. So I know of 21 women. I know of 14 children that he's had by 8 different women. And that 21 victims is just the women, the love fraud relationships he's had. I also know of 5 or 6 landlords who have been in touch with me who were ripped off hundreds of thousands of pounds. I know of businesses who were ripped off for hundreds of thousands of pounds. I know of charities that he set up websites for to do fundraising, who, when they went to collect the funds weren't there. I know he's posed as a pediatric doctor. He's posed as running a medical records company. He's posed as CIA, MOD, a foreign office abroad, a helicopter pilot. He's posed as just such an array of things. It's like, we set up a Facebook group. And I thoroughly recommend this, actually. It's so many people have said, can we join? It's like, sorry, it's a bit of an exclusive club. It's only victims of the same man, But it's been brilliant because we have actually been able to sort of share stories and really, as we've moved away from him, particularly, actually support each other in new relationships and understand how the women are feeling when they start dating someone new, for instance. So, that's been really, really positive and powerful as well.
It's a big thing. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about dating and trust now?
I'm not closed off to it, but I am of an age now where I really, really rather enjoy having the whole bed to myself. I have a dog that I have to kind of wrap myself around. I have loving children and great relationships and wonderful friends. I don't miss being in a relationship. I don't feel like I need to be in a relationship. If somebody wonderful kind of turned up and we clicked and we got on, I'd probably put a private detective on him.
Same.
So I'm not ruling it out, but I'm certainly not looking. I've dated a couple of times. And actually, it's funny stories, as they say, but there was one time I went on a first date with this guy and I was in this very beautiful hotel. There was a kind of roaring fire going and there was only one other couple in the room. And we were sitting there and I'm getting on really well. And I was really concerned because I was kind of going, what do I say? It's a heck of a lot to dump on somebody, on a first date. But at the same time, if you don't tell somebody, are you kind of lying to them? So I thought, I'll just leave it until the next date or something, and I'll just, get to know each other and that's fine. And so we're sitting there chatting away and we've been chatting for about 2 hours. And the other couple got up from across the room. And as they were leaving, because we were right beside the door, the woman came up to me and she tapped me on the side. I just wanted to say, I've read your book and I think it's so marvelous. You're absolutely wonderful. And they walked out the door and he was looking at me going, what? So okay, well, it was utterly hysterical. But I always think if you do tell somebody straight up, they're either going to think that I'm really damaged goods and complete liability and I can't touch this woman. She's obviously disturbed. Or they're going to think if I mess up, she's going to write a book about me. It's a sort of a lose-lose kind of situation, really, isn't it? So I'm just going through life being me, and I am very happy and very single and quite happy that way.
One of the elements that you talk about in your book that, again, resonated with me was this feeling of wanting to learn to fight after what you went through. And I had a similar element, and it was, I just needed to figure out how to defend myself, even though that threat had moved back to Australia. So he couldn't get me, but it was still this feeling of like, I don't like this vulnerability we have sometimes as women. And I need to know how to defend myself. And so I did something, I didn't do Taekwondo that you did. I did Jiu-Jitsu. And I didn't get to my black belt status that you did, which I think is so impressive. so impressive, especially when you hear your story of where you were at that time. But it's
Yeah.
something that I will always treasure is being involved in that community and honoring it. And I think it's something that, again, if we're looking at how do we help other women or men go through this, is saying that learning a martial art is one of the most powerful things that you can do for so many reasons. The physical, the mental, the emotional, the community.
Yeah. It helps massively with your physical self-confidence. And, the fact that you can defend yourself. Because, I mean, when you do the black belt exam, and I did Taekwondo, and luckily I had a very, very good teacher because I was a single mum. I had a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
And I went to this guy and I said, listen, I need to learn to fight. Can my children join in? So the children actually joined in the class, and the 1-year-old sat in the corner on a blanket. And as he got older, and sort of like 2 and 3, he used to hold on to my ankles whilst I was doing it. And I got my black belt within 3 years. I was pretty driven. But I mean, it gave me something really to focus on that was empowering me. And actually, there's one of the funniest stories I've got is actually to do with that. It was just before I did my black belt. When you're training for your black belt, I think it's easier nowadays, actually, because my kids did it and they didn't have to do this. But you had to defend yourself in the exam one-on-one with another black belt. And you're not both being examined. It's just one is being examined and the other one has to attack. Then you sort of have a rest, and then you become the person that's attacking, etc. And then you have to defend yourself against 2 black belts. And then you have to defend yourself against 3, and then you have to defend yourself against 4 black belts. And if you can't defend yourself against 4 other black belts, you don't pass your exam. So it's pretty tough. You have to be able to defend yourself against basically 4 guys, because it was always guys. There's very few women doing the black belt. And so I'm training for this. And so walking through the park with my, at the time, which was 10-year-old daughter and 7-year-old daughter. And my son was at nursery. And there were these teenage boys, group of them, about 6 or 7 of them. And they'd started a fire against this wall of this primary school. So I'd sort of said, is that your fire? And they said, no, nothing to do with us. And it's highly illegal. So I said, oh, fine. And I went and I stamped the fire out. One of the boys was very annoyed with me for doing that and started going towards the fire, striking a match, and I sort of like, said, oh, so it is your fire. And I took out my phone, which at the time was one of those really basic ones. It didn't have photograph capacity. It was just a phone. And they said, oh, it's going to call the police. And I actually kind of had a better thought. And I just turned around and I literally said, click, click, click. Sending I was taking photographs. And they all scattered. They just went, like, they sort of like, apart from 3 of them, but the rest all scattered. My dog went rushing after them, barking. But 3 of them, hoods went up. And they did something I'd never seen before. They did the kind of making gun shapes with their hands and, pointing down and up at the same time, this kind of hood stuff. Gangster style. Yes. I mean, they were only like 17, 18-year-olds or whatever. I mean, they were bigger than me, but they were kids. And they said, oh, we're going to mess you up. I'm using polite words. And instead of running away and feeling frightened, I was just feeling absolutely fine because I knew I could defend myself against 4 black belts. So these guys hadn't got a chance. So I started walking towards them quite slowly, just saying, oh, sorry, you want to hurt me? And they went, yeah, we're going to mess you up. And eventually I get close to this guy and I said, well, okay, but you've got to think about 2 different things here. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, one is that, how big are you going to look for beating up a fat 40-year-old woman? Because I've never been particularly slim. And then I said, but you've got to think about something else as well. And he went, what's that? And I said, you might not win. And at that point, the sheer confidence I had absolutely freaked him out. It did help the fact that my 10-year-old daughter was tugging on my coat the entire time, saying, Mum, don't hurt him. Don't hurt him. She had so much confidence that these guys didn't have a chance. I felt so proud of her, and that she and my other daughter have grown up absolutely unafraid of men and unafraid to sort of stick up for themselves. And they're all black belts. My younger daughter and son have won international competitions, gold medals, etc. in Taekwondo. So like when my daughter and her boyfriend get into strife, she pushes in behind her. It's that the sheer confidence. And all the way through school, nobody bullied them because they knew they could fight. They had that physical confidence. So I cannot recommend it highly enough. two things I would recommend highly. One is do a martial art because it just makes such a difference to your confidence. But the other is write it all down, because the catharsis you get from writing down any kind of trauma actually changes everything and how you feel about it.
So interesting you say that, because I talked it out with the podcast. And the writing piece for me has been a block from a time and energy. But I have written parts, but to write it all down, I was like, I've done my story. I've told it in this way on the podcast, and it feels like that is it done. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about was really interesting, you doing this documentary that's just come out. It'll be a few months after when it come out. It was one thing that I've been approached about with telling my story, and I just felt like I'd done it enough. But I'm also hearing from you, one thing that really comes out is your drive and your passion, why, and it is all around education. It's around education for people and to see that you don't have to have shame. And it's funny because I haven't felt brave enough to put my story into something as big as that, as into a documentary. I was like, it's enough that I've controlled the narrative. How did it feel doing the documentary?
You have to trust the people that are doing it. You have to. I mean, I've made documentaries in the past and they've been good. They've been fine. But because they've been 40-minute documentaries, they've just done the headlines. And so as a result, because they're just the headlines, it does make the victims look like bits of idiots because, she met this guy online. He told her she was a spy. She believed him. He said he was infertile, but she had children with him and still believed him, etc. And it doesn't gel. But this organization that's made this 3-part documentary series, they actually came up to see me before we did it. And we sat down, we had a coffee, and they said, what matters to you about this? And I said, what matters to me is that we educate people, that we make people understand that these psychopaths are around everywhere, that they have a huge impact, not just on the women that they're defrauding, but on their children and on their sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers. And it's like a bomb going off in a community. Because it's not you that's been just affected, it's your children, it's your family and everything else by your situation. And I want to make sure that none of the victims will be humiliated further by the documentary. And they were like, that's perfect, that's fine. And that's what they did. These people were really, really committed to doing it and committed to really telling the story the way we wanted it told. I'm really proud of it. I think it's amazing. It's called The Other Mrs. Jordan, Catching the Ultimate Con Man. I was expecting trolls, and I've done quite a lot of live TV and radio and stuff. But every time I've done stuff on TV, you get the people that come across it. Oh, how stupid is she? And really quite personal, nasty things people say. I'm pretty thick-skinned with it. But I was expecting it and I was prepared for it. There was nothing, absolutely nothing since this documentary's come out. It's been absolutely overwhelmingly powerful and wonderful and good. And I'm actually having to learn to take compliments because it's just been overwhelmingly, oh my God, you're amazing. And you're this, that, and the other. And it's like, yeah, I'm... I find that uncomfortable taking compliments, but the amount of mail I've had and the amount of support and people saying how much it has affected their way they see themselves is just amazing. So it has achieved everything that we had that first meeting about, and it's educating people about how to recover from this kind of thing as well.
That's the biggest message from my part too, is yes, we're going to go through all kinds of trauma and chaos in their lives, but actually how do we help educate and empower? It is all about that, because we can take control. We just not know in a society how to support that. That's the empath in me that wants to help everybody. So I guess that's part of this bravery piece for us to come out and speak and do this, is because we have a bigger mission. And to me, there has to be some good out of it. For the pain that that person has caused, it's like there is good, and we can choose to be part of that. It's big.
And there is, and actually, interesting enough, there's research studies shown that the people who experience trauma but then go do something with it, they get a degree or they write a book or they do a podcast or they change their life in some means or ways for the better and help other people, are the people that recover the fastest. Because what we're doing is we're actually putting value in the traumatic experience. I mean, I look at what I've done since that as well. I'm not grateful to him, but I'm grateful I had the opportunity to rise like a phoenix from the ashes. And that's something that has changed me entirely. I'm glad I had the opportunity to do that. And I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone. If my story can help anybody recover that a little bit faster or not get into the situation in the first place, even better, then it was all worth it.
Job done.
So, yeah, job done.
I have moments where I go back and go, oh, yeah, that happened. Well, that was a weird story. Oh, God. Can't believe that was my life sometimes. And those moments aren't even in the podcast. And this new podcast has been created out of that trauma. And I think that's what you said. It's that post-traumatic growth that comes out of what you make, and that's how that resilience builds. But that's a choice as well. We've both chosen to figure out how to move through this in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that's bravery.
Yeah.
To you, what is bravery?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Bravery is not the absence of fear. Bravery is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And so I guess if I am brave, it's because, even doing the black belt and stuff like that, I was prepared. I knew that he could possibly open the door one day and find him there. And when I went to America, they've got guns in America. It's like I was worried because I was going on stage and I've made his life very difficult. So I accept the fact that he could very well one day just decide to kill me. And it still wouldn't stop me, because that message still needs to go out there. That's my little bit of bravery, is going, it doesn't matter. If my life does end because of this, I would still carry on getting that message out there, because I don't want to see other people hurt. Me getting on a plane, going out to America, that was bravery because I'm terrified of flying. It's really interesting because even by the definition of stuff, a psychopath could never be brave. They don't have any fear of the future because they don't care about the future self any more than they care about other people. So they don't care that they're going to go to jail. They don't care they're going to hurt themselves. They literally don't care about the future self any more than they care about anyone else. So by definition, they can't be brave because they don't have the fear. In fact, interesting enough, the first sign of psychopathy in a child is fearlessness, because they don't have any worry or fear of consequences.
So many mic drop, like pennies just falling right now with people that I've interacted with, people that I've dated. So fascinating, Mary. There is so much more to uncover with your story. I mean, I highly recommend The Psychopath. That's what I've been burying myself in. My sister's read The Bigamist and was like, I can't put it down. And she loves true crime. She's one of the reasons why you're here, as well as Scottish friends that have connected us. Like, the world is so small. I love how it's so small.
I know.
So please, if you are listening to the podcast or watching the video later, check out Mary's work. It is one that is around empowering people. And for men and women, it is a powerful place to learn where you can take control. And I'm so grateful that you've written the books, that you've done a documentary. I hope it comes to New Zealand so that we can listen to it and watch
Fingers
it over
crossed,
here.
yes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And please keep being brave, because that is exactly what you are doing.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
It's been fun. Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to the Bravery Academy. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're looking to take your support for the podcast to the next level, visit patreon.com/The Bravery Academy to access exclusive content and get early access to our upcoming episodes. Your feedback means the world to us. So please take a moment to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for being part of the Bravery Academy community. Stay brave, stay curious, and keep challenging yourself to grow. Until next time.